When a group of cocky bikers steps into the underground fight scene, they underestimate their next opponent, a mysterious black soldier nicknamed the Ghost. What starts as a fight to prove dominance spirals into an intense game of survival as the bikers discover they've chosen the wrong man to challenge, uncovering secrets that connect them all to a dangerous conspiracy. The dim glow of flickering neon lights cast jagged shadows across the grimy walls of the underground arena. The air was thick with sweat and anticipation, a heady mix that charged the crowd like a live wire. Ryan strode through the mob with his biker crew trailing behind him. His leather jacket was emblazoned with the insignia of their gang, steel Hounds, a testament to their dominance in the streets. Tonight, however, wasn't about the streets. It was about proving a point. The underground fight scene was notorious in this part of town, a melting pot of raw power and unbridled aggression. Here, reputations were forged and shattered in equal measure. Ryan had been here before, but this night felt different. There was an unspoken energy in the air, something that set his teeth on edge. Yet he pushed the feeling aside, his swagger amplified by the jeers and cheers of the gathered crowd. Ryan's crew followed him closely, their boots crunching against the dirty floor. Some of them wore smirks, while others exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what was to come. Beside him, Marcus kept pace, his eyes scanning the arena with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He was one of the younger members of the crew, less hardened than the rest, but loyal to a fault. "Are you sure about this, Ryan?" Marcus asked, his voice low enough not to carry. "People say this guy's undefeated for a reason. You've seen the way the crowd talks about him. It's like they think he's invincible." Ryan shot him a sideways glance, his lip curling in disdain. "That's exactly why we're here, Marcus. You want the Steel Hounds to stay on top? Then we take down the best. Simple as that." His words were laced with overconfidence, masking the niggling doubts in the back of his mind. He clenched his fists tightly. Doubt had no place here, not tonight. Marcus hesitated, glancing at the others. "Yeah, but what if—" Ryan cut him off sharply. "No what-ifs, Marcus. We don't back down, and we sure as hell don't show fear. Got it?" Marcus nodded reluctantly, but kept his thoughts to himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far bigger than a simple brawl. The crowd parted as they reached the center of the arena. The ring itself was a crude construct of metal and ropes, surrounded by a sea of faces hungry for violence. At its heart stood the man known only as the Ghost. He leaned casually against the ropes, his physique a study in controlled power. Scars traced across his arms, each a story untold. His presence was magnetic, drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. It wasn't just his record that made him formidable. It was the quiet authority he exuded, as though he had faced far worse than anything this ring could offer. The Ghost looked up as Ryan stepped into the ring, his eyes locking onto the newcomer. For a moment, the crowd fell silent, the weight of the impending confrontation settling like a heavy fog. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, the Ghost gestured for Ryan to come closer. The challenge was clear, unspoken, yet deafening. Ryan smirked, throwing off his jacket. "You don't look like much to me," he taunted, his voice cutting through the tension. The Ghost said nothing, his silence more disconcerting than any retort. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's main event. In one corner, the undefeated Ghost, a man shrouded in mystery, and in the other, the Steel Hound's Ryan, here to make his mark." The crowd erupted in cheers and boos, a cacophony blending into a hypnotic rhythm. Ryan squared his shoulders, rolling his neck as though loosening up for a mere sparring session. The Ghost merely raised his fists, his stance fluid and relaxed, like a predator waiting to strike. The bell rang. Ryan launched forward, fists flying in a flurry meant to overwhelm. But the Ghost moved like water, his body twisting with supernatural grace. He dodged every punch, his counterstrikes landing with pinpoint accuracy. Within moments, Ryan was on the defensive, his confidence crumbling under the Ghost's unrelenting assault. Every blow was a lesson in precision, leaving Ryan scrambling. The crowd's cheers grew louder with each passing second, their energy feeding the ghost's momentum. Ryan, on the other hand, began to falter, his swings wild and desperate. He could feel his strength draining, each miss costing him more than he could afford. The ghost, however, seemed untouchable, his movements a mix of discipline and artistry. The fight ended almost as quickly as it began. Ryan hit the mat hard, the breath knocked out of him as the crowd exploded into chaos. The ghost stood over him, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving Ryan humiliated in the center of the ring. Marcus and the crew rushed to Ryan's side, pale with disbelief. "What just happened?" one muttered, helping Ryan to his feet. Ryan said nothing, his jaw clenched. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the steel hounds stumbled out, the ghost watched from the shadows, a faint smile on his lips. The night was far from over. Ryan's fists tightened, frustration mingling with a lingering trace of fear he wouldn't admit. For now, defeat burned more brightly than resolve. Deep down, he knew this wasn't a man they had simply underestimated. The ghost wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to make a statement. And Ryan, for all his bravado, had just become the first piece in what he feared was a much larger game. He swallowed hard, the taste of blood still sharp in his mouth, as his mind swirled with plans for revenge. The steel hounds rode back to their headquarters in silence, their usual raucous energy subdued. Ryan sat stiffly on his bike, the sting of humiliation still fresh on his face. The ride back through the dimly lit streets gave him too much time to think, and every thought circled back to the fight. His fists clenched on the handlebars, knuckles whitening beneath his gloves. He had never been outclassed so thoroughly, and the image of the ghost standing over him burned into his memory. Marcus, riding behind him, couldn't shake the tension in his chest. The fight had been brutal and fast, but what unsettled him most was how calm the ghost had seemed. It wasn't anger or hatred driving his fists. It was something else entirely. Precision. Control. It made Marcus wonder what kind of man could fight like that, and why someone so skilled would bother with underground brawls. Questions buzzed in his mind, but he kept them to himself. Ryan's mood was a storm, and poking at it would only invite disaster. The Steel Hounds' headquarters was a converted warehouse on the edge of the city. It was their sanctuary, a place where no one dared to challenge them. As they pulled into the lot, the roar of engines broke the silence, and for a brief moment, it felt like a return to normalcy. But as the bikes quieted and the crew dismounted, the weight of the night settled over them again. Inside, Ryan threw his helmet onto a battered couch, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. "That bastard," he muttered, pacing back and forth. His movements were sharp and agitated, his usual swagger replaced by a simmering rage. "He's not human. Did you see how he moved? It's like he knew what I was going to do before I did it." Marcus leaned against the wall, hesitant to speak but unable to stay silent. "Maybe we bit off more than we could chew, Ryan. That guy, he's on another level." Ryan's glare snapped to Marcus like a whip. "Don't start with that crap. Nobody's unbeatable. He's just a man, like the rest of us." "But what if he's not?" Marcus blurted out, surprising even himself. The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken until now. What if he's not just another fighter? There's something about him, Ryan. You felt it too, didn't you? The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had all seen it. The way the ghost moved, the way he looked at Ryan. It wasn't the look of a man sizing up an opponent. It was the look of someone with a plan, someone who had already won before the first punch was thrown. Ryan's jaw tightened, his frustration bubbling over. "I don't care what he is. He made me look weak, and nobody makes me look weak." He turned to the crew, his eyes blazing. "We're going to find him, and we're going to take him down. No more games." The declaration hung in the air, but it didn't have the rallying effect Ryan had hoped for. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his doubts growing with every word. "How, Ryan? He's not exactly easy to track down. You think he's just gonna let us come after him?" Ryan smirked, a flicker of his old confidence returning. "Everyone's got a weakness, Marcus. We just have to find his, and when we do, he'll regret ever stepping into that ring." Despite his bravado, Ryan knew it wouldn't be that simple. The ghost wasn't like anyone he had ever fought before. The man's silence, his precision, it all pointed to a past that Ryan didn't understand, and that made him dangerous. The next morning, Ryan sent the crew out to gather information. They split up, combing through the seediest corners of the city for any scrap of information about the ghost. By midday, they reconvened at the warehouse, their findings scattered and frustratingly vague. "He doesn't have a real name," one of the crew said, tossing a folder of clippings onto the table. "Nobody knows where he came from either. Just rumors. Some say he was military, others say he's a drifter." "What about his fights?" Ryan asked, scanning the documents with a frown. "Undefeated," another replied. "But it's weird. He doesn't fight often, and when he does, it's always against people like us. Gang leaders, guys with reputations, almost like he's picking targets." Ryan's frown deepened. "Picking targets? What the hell does that mean?" Marcus spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Maybe it's not about the fights. What if he's trying to send a message? Look at who he's fought. It's not random. He's going after people who think they're untouchable." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. The ghost wasn't just a fighter. He was something else entirely, a force of reckoning. Ryan slammed his fist onto the table, shattering the quiet. "I don't care what his deal is. He came after me, and now it's personal. We're gonna make him pay." But deep down, even Ryan couldn't shake the unease creeping through him. The ghost wasn't just a man. They all knew it, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. Whatever this was, it was bigger than a fight. And Ryan, for all his determination, was stepping into a game he didn't understand. He glanced at Marcus, who was unusually quiet, and felt a flicker of irritation. "If you're scared, just say so." Marcus met Ryan's glare but didn't respond. He wasn't scared, not of the ghost at least. What unnerved him was the realization that Ryan's pride was leading them into something far more dangerous than a street brawl. And Marcus had the sinking feeling that they'd already crossed a line they couldn't uncross. He studied the others, noting their unease, and knew they felt it too. The ghost wasn't just a man. He was a storm they couldn't outrun. And for the first time, Marcus wondered if they were already too late to turn back. The underground arena was electric with anticipation as the crowd pressed against the makeshift barriers, their voices melding into a chaotic symphony of excitement and impatience. This was no ordinary night. The return of the ghost to the ring had drawn a crowd even larger than usual. Whispers of his previous victories buzzed through the air, and though many had seen him fight before, each match seemed to carry an aura of unpredictability. In the shadows of the arena, Ryan stood with his crew, his jaw clenched and his fists balled tightly at his sides. He had insisted on coming back, against Marcus's protests and the uneasy silence of the rest of the Steel Hounds. To Ryan, this wasn't just about redemption, it was about erasing the memory of his defeat, proving that the ghost was mortal. The loss had been eating away at him like a poison, and tonight was his chance to set things right. Marcus watched Ryan from a distance, his unease growing with every passing moment. He didn't understand why Ryan had pushed for this rematch so soon. The ghost wasn't an ordinary opponent, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The way the ghost had dismantled Ryan in the last fight, it hadn't been a simple victory. It had been a statement. The ghost himself stood in the center of the ring, his presence as commanding as ever. His expression was calm, almost detached, as if the chaos of the crowd didn't reach him. He didn't acknowledge Ryan or his crew, his focus entirely on his pre-fight routine. It was a stark contrast to Ryan, whose frustration was palpable, his movements jerky and agitated. "Ryan, you don't have to do this," Marcus said, stepping closer to his friend. We can walk away. This doesn't have to be our fight." Ryan turned to Marcus, his eyes blazing with defiance. "I can't walk away, Marcus. You think I'm going to let him make a fool out of me twice? No way. Tonight, I end this." "But at what cost?" Marcus shot back, his voice rising. "This isn't just about you anymore, Ryan. You're dragging all of us into this, and for what? Your pride?" Ryan didn't answer. He turned back toward the ring, his jaw set. Marcus sighed, shaking his head. He could see that Ryan wasn't going to listen, and all he could do now was hope that this wouldn't end as badly as he feared. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, snapping the crowd to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's main event. In one corner, the undefeated Ghost, a man whose reputation speaks for itself. And in the other corner, the Steel Hounds' Ryan, back to settle the score." The crowd erupted in cheers and jeers, the noise almost deafening. Ryan stepped into the ring, his expression a mask of determination. But Marcus, watching from the sidelines, saw the cracks beneath it. Ryan wasn't ready, not for this fight, and not for what was coming. The bell rang. Ryan charged forward, his fists swinging with a fury that was more desperation than strategy. The Ghost moved as he had before, calm and calculated, dodging each attack with an almost supernatural ease. The crowd's cheers shifted to murmurs of disbelief as it became clear that the fight was going the same way as the last. But then, something changed. The Ghost struck harder, faster, his attacks more aggressive than before. It was as if he was sending a message, not just to Ryan but to everyone watching. The fight was over in moments, Ryan crumpling to the mat under the weight of the Ghost's final blow. The crowd was stunned into silence, the air thick with disbelief. The Ghost stood over Ryan, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked away without a word, leaving Ryan humiliated for the second time. Marcus rushed to Ryan's side, helping him to his feet. "Ryan, we need to stop this," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "He's not just a fighter. He's playing a game we don't understand." Ryan shoved Marcus away, his frustration boiling over. "I'm not done with him. This isn't over." But as Marcus looked into Ryan's eyes, he saw something that hadn't been there before. Fear. Ryan might not have been ready to admit it, but he was starting to understand the truth. The Ghost wasn't just another opponent. He was something far more dangerous, and Ryan had no idea how to fight him. That night, back at the warehouse, the Steel Hounds sat in tense silence. The air was heavy with unspoken words, each of them grappling with what they had seen. Ryan paced back and forth, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Marcus watched him warily, knowing that the next steps they took would shape everything that came next. "Ryan," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence, "we need to think this through. The Ghost isn't someone we can just beat with brute force. We need to figure out who he is, what he wants." "What he wants?" Ryan snapped, whirling to face Marcus. "He wants to humiliate me, that's what he wants, and I'm not going to let him get away with it." "Maybe it's not about you," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe this is bigger than us." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to be smart about this," Marcus said. "Rushing into another fight isn't the answer. If we're going to take him down, we need to understand him first." For a moment, Ryan said nothing, his jaw working as he fought to contain his frustration. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. We figure out who he is. But when we do, Marcus, I swear, he's mine." Marcus sighed, his unease deepening. He could feel it. The Ghost wasn't just another fighter. He was the start of something much bigger. And Marcus wasn't sure if they were ready for what was coming. The Steel Hounds had always considered themselves invincible in their corner of the city. Their dominance was never questioned, their authority unshaken, until now. The Ghost had done more than humiliate Ryan in the ring. He had shaken the very foundation of their gang. Whispers of the defeat spread through the city like wildfire, and Ryan knew that every rival gang was watching, waiting for the Steel Hounds to show weakness. It was late afternoon when Marcus arrived at the warehouse, his face drawn with worry. The rest of the crew was already there. their conversations subdued. Ryan stood at the far end of the room, poring over a map of the city, his frustration etched into every line of his body. His eyes scanned the markers they had placed, each representing a lead that had gone cold. The silence in the room was oppressive, the weight of their failure hanging over them like a dark cloud. "We've got a problem," Marcus said, breaking the quiet. All eyes turned to him. "I heard from a couple of guys down by the docks. Word is, other crews are starting to talk. They're thinking about testing us." Ryan didn't look up, his jaw tightening. "Let them try." "Ryan, this isn't just about us anymore," Marcus pressed. "The ghost has put a target on our backs. If we don't handle this the right way, we're going to have every gang in the city coming for us." Ryan slammed his fist onto the table, making everyone flinch. "We'll handle it. I'm not going to let some rumors tear us apart." But Marcus wasn't convinced. He could see the cracks forming, not just in Ryan but in the crew as well. The Steel Hounds were built on reputation, and now that reputation was in jeopardy. Without it, they were vulnerable. "We need to find him, Ryan, before this gets any worse." Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "We will, but we're doing it my way." For the next few days, the Steel Hounds threw themselves into the search for the ghost. They scoured the city, questioning anyone who might have seen or heard of him. But the man was a phantom, always one step ahead. It was as if he knew they were coming, disappearing before they could get too close. Each failed lead only added to Ryan's frustration, his temper shortening with every passing day. One night, as Marcus and Ryan sat in the dimly lit warehouse, their frustration boiled over. Marcus, usually calm, couldn't keep his concerns to himself anymore. "We're wasting time," he said, his voice tight. "He's not going to show himself unless he wants to." Ryan shot him a glare, the intensity of it cutting through the dim light. "So what? We just sit back and do nothing?" "No," Marcus replied, meeting Ryan's gaze. "We change the game. Make him come to us." Ryan frowned, considering the idea. "And how do we do that?" Marcus hesitated, then said, "We make ourselves the bait." The room fell silent as Ryan mulled over the suggestion. It was risky, but it was also the only plan they had. Slowly, he nodded. "Fine, let's do it." The next morning, the Steel Hounds began putting their plan into motion. They spread the word that they were organizing a high-stakes fight, one that would draw the best fighters in the city. It was a gamble, but they were counting on the ghost's ego, or whatever drove him, to bring him out of hiding. As the day of the fight approached, tension ran high. The warehouse was transformed into an arena, the Steel Hounds preparing for what felt like a battle rather than a show. Marcus watched the preparations with a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just about the ghost anymore. It was about survival. He could see it in the faces of the crew, the nervous glances, the forced bravado. They were all wondering the same thing. What if this didn't work? When the night of the fight finally arrived, the warehouse was packed. Fighters from across the city had come to prove themselves, but all eyes were on the Steel Hounds. Ryan stood in the center of the ring, his presence commanding as ever. He scanned the crowd, his jaw tightening when he didn't see the ghost. Hours passed, and still there was no sign of him. The fights continued, brutal and relentless, but Ryan's focus never wavered. He was waiting, watching. The tension in the room was palpable, each moment dragging on like an eternity. And then, just as the crowd began to lose interest, the air in the warehouse shifted. Marcus felt it first, a change in the atmosphere, a palpable tension that sent a shiver down his spine. It was subtle at first, an almost imperceptible ripple through the crowd. But as heads began to turn, the shift became undeniable. The ghost had arrived. He stepped into the warehouse, his presence silencing the crowd. He didn't say a word, didn't even look at Ryan. He simply walked to the edge of the ring, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around him. The crowd parted for him without hesitation, as if his presence alone commanded respect. Ryan's fists clenched at his sides as he met the ghost's gaze. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. But as the two men faced off, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing right into the ghost's hands. There was a look in the ghost's eyes, one that Marcus recognized instantly. Calculation. He wasn't just here to fight. He was here to send a message. As the room held its breath, waiting for the confrontation to begin, Marcus realized that they were in deeper than they had ever imagined. And, for the first time, he wasn't sure if they could find their way out. The room held its collective breath as the ghost stood at the edge of the ring, his gaze calm and unwavering. Ryan was already in the center, his fists clenched and his body taut with barely restrained tension. The crowd was silent, every eye fixed on the two men. It was a moment suspended in time, a standoff that seemed to stretch endlessly. Ryan broke the silence first. "You think you can just walk in here like you own the place?" he snarled, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "You're not untouchable." The ghost didn't respond. He climbed into the ring with deliberate, measured movements, his silence only fueling the tension in the room. His calmness was unnerving, a stark contrast to Ryan's fiery aggression. The crowd murmured, the anticipation thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood at the edge of the ring, his heart pounding. This wasn't just a fight, it was something else entirely. He could see it in the ghost's eyes, in the way he moved. He wasn't here for the crowd or the glory. He was here for a reason, and that reason terrified Marcus. The aura around the ghost was different, something beyond confidence, something closer to inevitability. It felt as though the outcome had already been decided, and the fight hadn't even begun. The announcer stepped forward, his voice hesitant but loud enough to carry over the hushed crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, the match you've all been waiting for, Ryan of the Steel Hounds versus the undefeated Ghost." The crowd erupted into cheers and jeers, their energy crackling through the air. Ryan and the Ghost stood at opposite ends of the ring, their eyes locked. The announcer stepped back, and the bell rang. Ryan launched himself forward, his fists flying in a furious barrage. But the ghost was ready. He moved with a grace that seemed almost inhuman, dodging Ryan's attacks with effortless precision. Each swing Ryan threw missed its mark, his frustration mounting with every second. The crowd's excitement began to shift into murmurs, their faith in Ryan waning as the ghost's dominance became clear. The ghost struck back with calculated efficiency. His movements were precise, each strike landing exactly where it was meant to. Ryan stumbled, his confidence faltering under the weight of the ghost's assault. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the fight played out, their cheers fading into murmurs of disbelief. Marcus watched from the sidelines, his chest tight with dread. This wasn't a fight, it was a dismantling. The ghost wasn't just beating Ryan, he was breaking him, piece by piece. Marcus could see it in Ryan's movements, the way his swings grew wild and desperate. He was losing control, and the ghost was taking full advantage. But then something unexpected happened. Ryan managed to land a hit, a wild swing that caught the ghost off guard. The crowd gasped, their energy reignited. Ryan pressed the advantage, throwing everything he had into a flurry of attacks. For a moment, it seemed like he might turn the tide. The ghost staggered slightly, the first hint of vulnerability he had shown. Ryan's crew roared in encouragement, their faith momentarily restored. The ghost recovered quickly, his calm demeanor unshaken. He dodged Ryan's next swing and countered with a devastating blow to the ribs. Ryan staggered, the wind knocked out of him. The crowd's cheers faltered, replaced by a collective gasp. Marcus winced, the sound of the impact reverberating through the warehouse. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. The fight ended moments later. Ryan fell to the mat, gasping for breath, his body unable to keep up with the ghost's relentless assault. The ghost stood over him, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his fists in victory or bask in the crowd's reaction. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Ryan defeated once again. The room was silent, the crowd too stunned to react. Marcus climbed into the ring, kneeling beside Ryan. "Ryan, are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. Ryan didn't answer. His pride had taken a hit far greater than any physical injury. He pushed himself up, his movements slow and pained. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Marcus helped him out of the ring, the crowd parting for them as they made their way to the exit. The ghost watched them go, his expression unreadable. He hadn't just won the fight, he had made his point. The crew's silence was telling, their usual bravado completely absent as they exited the warehouse. Ryan's defeat had shaken more than just their confidence. It had shaken their identity. That night, back at the warehouse, the Steel Hounds were quiet. The air was heavy with the weight of their leader's defeat. Ryan sat alone in a corner, his head in his hands. Marcus approached him cautiously, unsure of what to say. "Ryan, we need to figure out who he is," Marcus said finally. "This isn't just about fighting anymore. He's doing this for a reason." Ryan looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "Then we find out what it is," he said. "No more games. We're going to end this, one way or another." Marcus nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were in over their heads. The ghost wasn't just a man. He was a force. And Marcus wasn't sure if the Steel Hounds could stand against him. The shadows seemed deeper that night, and every creak of the warehouse made Marcus feel as if something, or someone, was watching them. Ryan didn't notice. His anger burned too bright, drowning out any hint of fear or caution. But Marcus wasn't so sure. He felt it in his bones. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The days after Ryan's second defeat were a haze of frustration and tension for the Steel Hounds. Their once unshakable leader had withdrawn into himself, his presence in the warehouse more a shadow than a force. Ryan's silence was unnerving, and the crew whispered among themselves, wondering what would happen next. Marcus watched it all with growing unease. He had never seen Ryan like this, and it scared him. The Steel Hounds were only as strong as their leader, and right now, Ryan was crumbling. If something didn't change soon, Marcus knew their entire operation would collapse. Determined to take matters into his own hands, Marcus began digging into the ghost's past. He scoured every lead they had gathered, combed through old fight records, and even reached out to a few underground contacts. But the ghost was like a phantom, his trail disappearing just when Marcus thought he was getting close. One night, as the rest of the crew played cards in the corner, Marcus sat hunched over a table surrounded by scraps of paper and old photographs. His eyes scanned a faded clipping from a newspaper, the headline barely legible. "Unstoppable Fighter Dominates Underground Circuit." The article was from years ago, detailing a fighter with a style eerily similar to the ghost's. The name was different. The Phantom. But the description matched perfectly. "Find anything?" Ryan's voice cut through the quiet, startling Marcus. He looked up to see Ryan standing over him, his expression hard. "Maybe," Marcus said cautiously, holding up the clipping. "This guy. He fought like the ghost. Same style, same reputation, but he disappeared about 5 years ago." Ryan took the clipping, his eyes scanning the article. "You think it's him?" Marcus shrugged. "Could be. If it is, he's been in this game longer than we thought." Ryan's jaw tightened. He set the clipping down and stared at the mess of papers on the table. "Keep digging," he said finally. "We need to know everything." For the next few days, Marcus threw himself into the search with renewed determination. He pieced together a fragmented history of underground fights, tracing the Phantom's rise and sudden disappearance. The deeper he dug, the more he realized how little anyone knew about the man behind the name. It was as if he had deliberately erased himself, leaving only rumors and whispers in his wake. Then, late one night, Marcus found it, a single thread that might unravel the mystery. An old fighter, long retired, who had once faced the Phantom in the ring. The man's name was Carter, and he lived in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. The next morning, Marcus approached Ryan with the information. "I found someone who might know something," he said. "An old fighter named Carter. He's the only guy I could find who fought the Phantom. and survived. Ryan's eyes lit up with a dangerous intensity. Where is he? Marcus hesitated. Look, I don't know what we're walking into here. If the phantom really is the ghost, then this guy's got a reason for staying off the radar. We need to be careful. Ryan's expression darkened. We don't have time to be careful. Get the crew. We're going. An hour later, the steel hounds rode out, their bikes roaring through the streets as they made their way to Carter's apartment. The building was a decrepit relic of a better time, its paint peeling and windows cracked. Marcus led the way, his heart pounding as they climbed the narrow staircase to the third floor. Carter answered the door after the second knock, his face lined with age and weariness. His eyes narrowed as he took in the group. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. "We need to talk about the phantom," Ryan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Carter's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games with us," Ryan snapped, stepping forward. "We know you fought him. We just need to know what you know." Carter stared at Ryan for a long moment, then sighed and stepped aside. "Come in," he muttered. The apartment was small and cluttered, the air heavy with the scent of stale cigarettes. Carter sank into a worn armchair, motioning for the others to sit. "You're wasting your time," he said. "The phantom's gone. Has been for years." Ryan crossed his arms. "He's not gone. He's back, and he's calling himself the Ghost." Carter's eyes flickered with recognition, but he said nothing. Marcus leaned forward. "We just need to know who he is, why he's doing this." Carter sighed again, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You don't want to know," he said quietly. "That man, he's not like the rest of us. He doesn't fight for money, or pride, or any of the reasons you think. He fights for something else, something darker." The room fell silent as Carter's words hung in the air. Ryan's jaw tightened. "I don't care why he fights," he said. "I just want to know how to beat him." Carter shook his head. "You don't beat him. You survive him. And if you're smart, you walk away while you still can." Ryan's eyes burned with determination. "I'm not walking away." Carter studied him for a long moment, then nodded grimly. "Then you'd better be ready, because if he's come back, he's got a reason. And whatever it is, it's bigger than you." Carter stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the crumbling cityscape. "I'll tell you one thing," he added. "When he fought me, he wasn't trying to win. He was trying to teach me something. The only question is, what is he trying to teach you?" The crew left Carter's apartment in silence, the weight of his words heavy on their shoulders. As the engines of their bikes roared to life, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing toward a storm they couldn't outrun. The ride back from Carter's apartment was quieter than Marcus had expected. The usual roar of the steel hounds' bikes felt muted, the weight of Carter's words hanging over them like a storm cloud. Marcus rode behind Ryan, watching his leader's tense posture and clenched fists. He knew Ryan was seething, his mind churning with questions and doubts. But Marcus also knew better than to break the silence. Ryan needed time to process what they'd learned, and the crew needed to see him as unshaken, even if they knew he wasn't. Back at the warehouse, the tension didn't lift. The crew dispersed quickly, muttering their excuses to avoid lingering too long. Marcus stayed behind, watching as Ryan parked his bike and walked toward the dark corner of the warehouse he'd claimed as his own. He seemed lost in thought, his usual fire dimmed. Marcus approached cautiously, holding a pair of beers he'd grabbed from the fridge. "You okay?" he asked, handing one to Ryan. Ryan took the bottle without looking up. "Fine," he muttered. "You don't look fine," Marcus said, sitting on an overturned crate nearby. "Look, Carter's warning was serious. He's scared, Ryan, and if a guy like that's scared, maybe we should be too." Ryan's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "I'm not scared of him." "Then what are you?" Marcus pressed. "Because this isn't the Ryan I know. You're letting him get in your head." Ryan slammed the beer bottle onto the table, the glass shattering under the force. Marcus flinched but didn't move. "He hasn't gotten in my head," Ryan growled, "but I'm done playing his game. We find him, Marcus, and we end this." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And how do you plan to do that? The guy's a ghost. He's been one for years." Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse. The next morning, Marcus found Ryan already awake, poring over maps and notes spread across a table. His eyes were bloodshot, and a half-empty pot of coffee sat beside him. Marcus hesitated in the doorway, unsure if he should interrupt. "We're missing something," Ryan said without looking up. "Carter said he wasn't trying to win. He was trying to teach something. What the hell does that mean?" Marcus stepped into the room, leaning against the wall. "I don't know, but maybe it's not about the fights. Maybe it's about you." Ryan shot him a glare. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, maybe he's not trying to beat you physically," Marcus said carefully. "Maybe he's trying to break you, make you doubt yourself." Ryan scoffed. "Good luck with that." But Marcus wasn't so sure. He could see the doubt creeping into Ryan's eyes, the weight of everything they'd learned pressing down on him. And, for the first time, Marcus wasn't sure if Ryan could carry it. The days that followed were a blur of preparation and frustration. Ryan threw himself into training, pushing his body to the limit in an attempt to distract himself from the questions swirling in his mind. The crew watched uneasily, their leader's intensity unsettling even to them. Marcus tried to keep them focused, but the cracks were spreading, and he wasn't sure how much longer they could hold together. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a courier arrived at the warehouse. The young man looked nervous as he handed Marcus a plain envelope, his hands shaking slightly. "This is for Ryan," he said before hurrying away. Marcus frowned, turning the envelope over in his hands. There was no name, no return address, just the faint scent of smoke clinging to the paper. He carried it to Ryan, who was in the middle of sparring with one of the crew. "What's this?" Ryan asked, taking the envelope. "Courier dropped it off," Marcus said. "Said it's for you." Ryan tore the envelope open, his eyes scanning the single sheet of paper inside. His expression darkened as he read, his jaw tightening with each word. When he finished, he crumpled the paper in his fist and threw it to the ground. "What is it?" Marcus asked, picking up the paper. The note was short, written in bold, precise letters. "Tomorrow, midnight, the old mill." Marcus looked up at Ryan. "It's him." Ryan nodded. "It's him." The crew gathered quickly, their excitement tempered by the gravity of the situation. For all their bravado, they knew this wasn't just another fight. This was a reckoning, and the stakes were higher than any of them cared to admit. Ryan's orders were clear. They would go to the old mill, but the fight was his alone. No interference. No backup. As midnight approached, the steel hounds arrived at the abandoned mill on the outskirts of the city. The air was heavy with the scent of rust and decay, the massive structure looming over them like a specter. Ryan dismounted his bike, his movements deliberate as he strode toward the building. The rest of the crew stayed back, their bikes forming a loose circle around the mill. Marcus followed Ryan to the entrance, his heart pounding. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can find another way." Ryan shook his head. "No, Marcus, this ends tonight." Marcus nodded reluctantly, stepping back as Ryan pushed open the rusted door and disappeared into the darkness. The crew waited in tense silence, their breaths visible in the cold night air. The creaking of the mill in the wind sounded eerily like whispers, and for the first time, Marcus felt a chill he couldn't shake. The shadows around the mill seemed to deepen, as though the building itself was alive and waiting. Every sound, the faint rustle of the wind, the distant call of an owl, felt amplified, unnatural. Marcus glanced at the crew, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just a fight, it was a confrontation with something far larger than any of them could understand. The interior of the old mill was a cavern of shadows and decay. Ryan's boots echoed against the cracked concrete as he stepped inside. the faint scent of mildew and rust filling the air. Pale moonlight filtered through broken windows high above, casting fractured beams of light that danced across the walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. Somewhere in the shadows, the ghost was waiting. Ryan's fists clenched at his sides as he moved deeper into the mill. His breathing was steady, but his heart thundered in his chest. This wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning. And for the first time in his life, Ryan wasn't sure if he was ready. Ryan. The voice was low, calm, and impossibly close. Ryan spun around, his eyes scanning the darkness, but he saw nothing. "Show yourself," he barked, his voice echoing through the empty space. A figure stepped into one of the moonlit beams, his movements fluid and deliberate. The ghost was just as Ryan remembered, silent, composed, and terrifyingly still. He stood there, his arms loose at his sides, his head tilted slightly as though he were studying Ryan. "You came," the ghost said, his voice devoid of emotion. Ryan squared his shoulders. "You asked." The ghost took a step forward, his boots soundless against the concrete. "Do you know why I called you here?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "To finish this." The ghost shook his head. "No. To begin." The cryptic response sent a chill down Ryan's spine, but he refused to show it. "Enough games. Let's do this." The ghost remained motionless, his gaze unwavering. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said softly. "This isn't about me. It's about you." Ryan didn't respond. He surged forward, throwing a powerful right hook aimed at the ghost's jaw. But the ghost moved like smoke, slipping past the punch with effortless precision. His counterattack was immediate, a sharp jab to Ryan's ribs that left him gasping. Ryan stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. He hadn't even seen the punch coming. "You're predictable," the ghost said, his tone almost pitying. "All brute force, no discipline." "Shut up," Ryan growled, charging again. This time he swung wildly, his punches fueled by frustration and rage. But the ghost was untouchable, dodging each blow with maddening ease. The fight quickly turned into a one-sided affair. The ghost didn't overwhelm Ryan with sheer power, he dismantled him with precision. Every strike was calculated, every movement deliberate. Ryan felt like a child flailing against a storm. "You fight for pride," the ghost said, his voice calm even as he delivered a devastating blow to Ryan's abdomen. "That's your weakness." Ryan collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Pain radiated through his body, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation burning in his chest. He looked up at the ghost, his vision blurred with anger and tears. "What do you want from me?" Ryan demanded, his voice hoarse. The ghost crouched down, his face level with Ryan's. "I want you to see," he said quietly. "Your strength means nothing without purpose. Your pride will destroy you." Ryan stared at him, his chest heaving. He wanted to lash out, to fight back, but his body wouldn't obey. For the first time, he felt powerless. The ghost stood, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over," he said. "You'll face me again, but not until you're ready." Before Ryan could respond, the ghost turned and disappeared into the shadows. His footsteps faded into the distance, leaving Ryan alone in the empty mill. The silence returned, heavier now, pressing down on Ryan as he remained on his knees. The realization of his defeat seeped into him like cold water. He had thought this fight would be a simple matter of strength, but the ghost had shattered that illusion. Minutes passed, but Ryan didn't move. His mind raced, replaying every moment of the fight, every word the ghost had said. He felt the weight of those words settling on him, their truth undeniable. He had fought for pride, for glory, but now he saw how hollow those things were. The sound of footsteps echoed through the mill, pulling Ryan from his thoughts. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. "Ryan," he called, his voice tentative. Ryan didn't respond. He couldn't bring himself to meet Marcus's eyes. Marcus approached cautiously, his boots crunching against the debris scattered across the floor. When he reached Ryan, he knelt beside him. "What happened?" he asked softly. Ryan shook his head. "He's gone." Marcus frowned, his eyes scanning the shadows. "What did he say?" Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "That I'm predictable, that my pride will destroy me. He's right, Marcus. I've been fighting for the wrong reasons." Marcus placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, his grip firm. "Maybe this is what you needed to hear. Maybe this is your chance to change." Ryan looked at Marcus, his eyes filled with doubt. "What if I can't?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Then we'll figure it out together. But you're not done, Ryan." "Not yet." Ryan nodded slowly, the fire in his chest beginning to rekindle. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. As he stood, the cold, oppressive weight of defeat began to give way to something warmer, a flicker of determination. He wasn't finished, not yet. The shadows of the mill seemed to watch as Ryan and Marcus walked out, leaving the silence behind. For the first time, Ryan felt like he was stepping toward something real. And though the path ahead was uncertain, he was ready to face it. Behind them, the mill stood in stillness, a silent witness to the fight that had been more than just physical. Somewhere within its walls, the faint echo of footsteps lingered, as if the ghost were still watching. The days after the confrontation at the mill were a blur of pain and introspection for Ryan. He avoided the crew, spending hours alone in the warehouse or on long, aimless rides through the city. The humiliation of his defeat lingered, but it wasn't just the loss that haunted him. It was the ghost's words. Ryan couldn't shake the weight of what the ghost had said, his pride, his lack of discipline, his absence of purpose. They weren't just criticisms, they were truths he couldn't deny. For years, Ryan had built his reputation on brute force and fear, but now those foundations felt fragile, ready to crumble under the weight of his failure. Marcus, ever the loyal friend, gave Ryan his space but refused to let him drift too far. He checked in regularly, leaving food at the warehouse and offering quiet words of encouragement. "You'll get through this," he said one evening, his voice steady. "But you have to decide what kind of man you want to be." Ryan didn't respond, but the words stuck with him. The crew was restless, their faith in Ryan shaken. Whispers spread through the ranks, questions about whether Ryan was still fit to lead, doubts about his strength, and even murmurs of rebellion. Marcus squashed them when he could, but the tension was palpable. The Steel Hounds were a pack, and a pack needed a strong alpha. One night, as the city's neon lights flickered in the distance, Ryan found himself standing before a rusted punching bag in the corner of the warehouse. Dust clung to the air, and the faint hum of passing cars echoed in the background. He hadn't touched the bag in years, relying instead on his natural strength and instincts. But now, with the ghost's words replaying in his mind, he felt compelled. Ryan began to punch, his fists slamming into the bag with raw force. Each strike sent vibrations through his arms, but it wasn't enough. He wasn't just fighting the bag, he was fighting himself, fighting his doubts, his fears, and the man he had been. The hours passed, and Ryan's punches grew more measured. He started to focus on his technique, remembering the lessons he had ignored in his youth. His footwork became lighter, his movements more deliberate. Sweat dripped from his brow as he pushed himself harder, the old fire in his chest reigniting. Marcus found him there just before dawn, his face streaked with exhaustion but his eyes blazing with determination. "You're up early," Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe. Ryan didn't stop. "I'm not done yet." Marcus nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Good." As the days turned into weeks, Ryan's transformation became evident. He trained relentlessly, studying techniques he had once dismissed and seeking advice from fighters he had long considered beneath him. The steel hounds watched in awe as their leader rebuilt himself piece by piece, his humility earning him a new kind of respect. But not everyone was convinced. A faction within the crew, led by a brash enforcer named Kane, began to stir trouble. Kane had always been ambitious, and Ryan's recent struggles had emboldened him. He challenged Ryan openly during a meeting, his voice dripping with disdain. "Why should we follow you?" Kane sneered. "You've lost your edge. The ghost showed us that." Ryan didn't flinch. He met Kane's gaze, his voice calm but firm. "You think you can do better?" Kane smirked, stepping forward. "Maybe I can." The warehouse fell silent as the challenge hung in the air. Ryan's crew looked to him, their loyalty wavering. This was a moment of truth, not just for Ryan, but for the steel hounds as a whole. Ryan stepped forward, his movements deliberate. "Let's settle this," he said. "Right here, right now." Kane hesitated, his confidence faltering under Ryan's unwavering stare, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Fine," he growled. The fight was short, but decisive. Ryan's newfound discipline and technique overwhelmed Kane, who relied on brute strength and arrogance. Within minutes, Kane was on the ground, gasping for air as Ryan stood over him. "This is my crew," Ryan said, his voice steady, "and I will lead it. But things are going to change." He turned to the rest of the steel hounds, his gaze sweeping over them. "We've lost our way," he said. "We've been fighting for the wrong reasons. Fear, power, pride. That ends now. If you're with me, we're going to rebuild, stronger, smarter, with purpose." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but one by one, they nodded. Ryan's victory over Kane had reignited their belief in him, but it was his vision for the future that truly inspired them. As the meeting dispersed, Marcus approached Ryan, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You're turning a corner," he said. "The crew's behind you, but this is just the beginning." Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "I know. The ghost is still out there." "And when the time comes," Marcus said, "you'll be ready." Ryan didn't respond, but the determination in his eyes said it all. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for pride or power. He was fighting for something greater. And this time, he wouldn't stop until he won. The weeks following Ryan's declaration to the steel hounds were marked by a slow but steady shift. The crew, once a chaotic force driven by impulse and pride, began to resemble something stronger, a unified group with a shared purpose. It wasn't easy. Old habits clung stubbornly to some, and there were moments when Ryan questioned whether he could truly change the culture he had helped create. But every step forward, no matter how small, gave him hope. Marcus proved to be Ryan's most valuable ally. With a quiet, steady hand, he smoothed over conflicts that arose within the crew and reinforced Ryan's new vision. "You're leading differently now," Marcus told him one evening. "They see it, and the ones who don't yet, they will." Ryan's transformation extended beyond the steel hounds. He reached out to a few of the gym owners he had once dismissed, seeking their guidance on refining his technique. His humility surprised them, and though some were hesitant at first, they eventually welcomed him in. Ryan found himself training alongside fighters who, just months ago, he would have scorned as beneath him. Now, he watched and learned. One day, while shadowboxing in a corner of a dusty gym, a wiry old trainer approached him. "You've got power," the man said, his voice raspy with age, "but you've been wasting it." Ryan paused, his breath coming hard. "I'm trying to fix that." The trainer nodded. "Good. Power's not enough. You need control. You need focus. You want to win? Fight smart. Fight with purpose." The words echoed in Ryan's mind long after he left the gym. Purpose. It had become a mantra for him, guiding his decisions and shaping his actions. As Ryan honed his skills, the steel hounds underwent their own transformation. They began taking on challenges that tested their strength and resolve, both as individuals and as a crew. No more petty fights or pointless displays of dominance. Instead, they sought challenges that demanded teamwork and strategy. One such challenge came in the form of a rival crew, the Iron Serpents. The two groups had clashed before, but this time the confrontation felt different. The Serpents had heard of the changes within the Steel Hounds and saw them as an opportunity to assert their dominance. Their leader, a cunning and ruthless man named Victor, issued a challenge, a high-stakes bout between their best fighters. Ryan accepted without hesitation. This wasn't just about proving the Steel Hound's strength, it was a chance to show that they had truly changed. The weeks leading up to the fight were intense. Ryan worked tirelessly with the crew, drilling them on strategy and pushing them to their limits. He knew the Serpents would be tough, and he wanted his crew to be ready for anything. On the night of the bout, the tension was palpable. The fight was held in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, its dimly lit interior packed with spectators from both crews. The air was thick with anticipation, and the hum of voices created a low, steady buzz. Ryan stood at the edge of the makeshift ring, his arms crossed as he watched the first fight unfold. The Serpent's fighter was skilled, but the Hound's representative held his own, his movements sharp and controlled. The fight ended in a narrow victory for the Hounds, and the crowd erupted in cheers. The night continued with a series of matches, each one more intense than the last. The Hounds fought with discipline and focus, their newfound purpose evident in every move. By the final bout, the score was tied and all eyes turned to Ryan and Victor. "This is it," Marcus said, placing a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "You ready?" Ryan nodded. "More than ever." As he stepped into the ring, Ryan felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just a fight, it was a test of everything he had worked for. The ghost's words echoed in his mind. "Your strength means nothing without purpose." The fight began, and Ryan's focus sharpened. Victor was fast and calculated, his strikes landing with precision. But Ryan was ready. He moved with a grace and control he had never possessed before, each movement deliberate and purposeful. The crowd roared as the two fighters exchanged blows, their energy electrifying the room. Ryan felt the sting of Victor's punches, but he didn't let them shake him. He stayed grounded, his mind clear. As the fight wore on, Ryan began to see the cracks in Victor's defense. A slight hesitation here, a misstep there. He capitalized on each one, his strikes landing with increasing accuracy. The tide turned and the crowd sensed it. With a final, powerful blow, Ryan sent Victor to the mat. The room erupted in cheers as the referee signaled the end of the fight. Ryan stood in the center of the ring, his chest heaving as he looked out at the crowd. For the first time, he felt not just victorious, but fulfilled. Victor climbed to his feet, his expression a mix of anger and respect. "You've changed," he said, his voice low. "This isn't the same Steel Hounds I remember." Ryan extended a hand. "That's the point." Victor hesitated, then took it. The two men shook hands and the crowd roared their approval. As Ryan stepped out of the ring, Marcus was waiting for him, a proud grin on his face. "You did it," he said. Ryan shook his head. "We did it." The ride back to the Steel Hounds' headquarters was different that night. The crew was quiet, their usual boisterous energy replaced with a quiet pride. Ryan led the way, the cool night air rushing past him as the city lights blurred in the distance. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The Steel Hounds' victory over the Iron Serpents marked a turning point. It wasn't just a win, it was proof that change was possible. The crew, once divided by egos and mistrust, began to function as a cohesive unit. For Ryan, it was a vindication of everything he had fought for since his encounter with the Ghost, but he knew the real challenges were still ahead. Ryan's focus shifted from the physical to the strategic. The Steel Hounds had spent years dominating their rivals through brute force, but Ryan wanted something more. He began organizing outreach efforts, connecting with other crews to broker alliances and resolve conflicts. His goal wasn't just to strengthen the Hounds, It was to create a network of crews united by mutual respect and shared goals. Marcus was skeptical at first. "You really think these guys want to play nice?" he asked one afternoon as they reviewed a list of potential allies. "They don't have to play nice," Ryan replied. "They just have to see the bigger picture. The city's changing, Marcus. If we don't adapt, we'll get left behind." The first few meetings were tense. Rival leaders were wary of Ryan's intentions, and more than once negotiations nearly ended in violence. But Ryan's persistence paid off. Slowly, he began to build a coalition of crews willing to set aside their differences for the sake of stability. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his personal training. The fight against Victor had shown him how far he'd come, but it also revealed his limitations. He sought out new mentors, immersing himself in techniques he had once dismissed as unnecessary. His newfound humility opened doors that had been closed to him for years, and he soaked up knowledge like a sponge. One day, during a particularly grueling sparring session, Ryan's trainer pulled him aside. "You're ready," he said, his voice firm. "You've got the skill, the discipline, but do you have the heart?" Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" The trainer crossed his arms. "You've changed a lot, but there's still something holding you back. You need to figure out what that is, and let it go." The words haunted Ryan for days. He knew the trainer was right. Despite his progress, there was a part of him that still clung to the man he used to be. The ghost had forced him to confront his flaws, but Ryan realized he hadn't fully let go of them. As Ryan grappled with his inner demons, a new threat emerged. Rumors began to circulate about a mysterious figure known only as the Revenant. Unlike the Iron Serpents or other rival crews, the Revenant wasn't interested in territory or power. His targets were the leaders of the city's most prominent crews, and his methods were brutal. Several high-ranking members of rival crews had already fallen victim to his attacks, and fear spread like wildfire. The Steel Hounds were no exception. Late one night, Ryan received a message, a scrap of paper with a single word scrawled across it. "Soon." It was unsigned, but Ryan knew who it was from. The Revenant had marked him as his next target. Marcus was livid when he found out. "We need to hit this guy first," he said, pacing the warehouse. "Take the fight to him before he brings it to us." Ryan shook his head. "That's what he wants. If we go after him on his terms, we'll lose." "So what do we do?" Marcus demanded. Ryan clenched his fists. "We prepare." The Steel Hounds went on high alert. Ryan worked with the crew to fortify their headquarters and train for every possible scenario. He knew they couldn't afford to underestimate the Revenant, but he also understood the psychological toll the situation was taking on his crew. Fear was a powerful weapon, and the Revenant wielded it expertly. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew unbearable. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face felt like a potential threat. The Steel Hounds were on edge, but Ryan refused to let fear control them. He held frequent meetings reminding the crew of their strength and unity. "We've faced worse," he told them, "and we've come out stronger. This won't be any different." But deep down, Ryan wasn't so sure. The Revenant's reputation was as much myth as reality, and Ryan knew they were up against something far more dangerous than a rival crew. The Ghost's lessons had taught him to face his fears head-on, but this was a test unlike any he had faced before. One evening, as Ryan reviewed the crew's security plans, Marcus approached him. "You're doing everything right," he said, "but are you ready?" Ryan looked up, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have to be." Marcus nodded, his faith in Ryan unwavering. "We've got your back." That night, Ryan climbed to the rooftop of their headquarters, looking out over the streets below. The city lights glimmered like scattered stars, their glow soft and unyielding. The night air carried the distant hum of life below, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Ryan gripped the edge of the railing, the cold metal grounding him. Somewhere out there, the Revenant was waiting. But Ryan was ready. Or so he told himself. The Revenant struck when the Steel Hounds least expected it. The attack came in the dead of night, silent and swift, leaving chaos in its wake. Ryan had been preparing for weeks, fortifying their headquarters and ensuring the crew was always on high alert. But even with all their precautions, nothing could have fully prepared them for the cunning and brutality of their new enemy. Ryan was woken by the sound of alarms blaring through the headquarters. He bolted upright, his heart pounding as he grabbed the knife he kept by his bedside. Shouts echoed through the corridors, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. He was out the door in seconds, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what was happening. Marcus met him in the hallway, his face grim. "It's him," he said, his voice tight. "The Revenant's here." Ryan nodded, his grip tightening around the knife. "Where?" "South entrance," Marcus replied. "He's got a few guys with him. They're good, real good." Ryan didn't waste time. He led Marcus and a small group of crew members toward the south entrance, their footsteps echoing against the cold concrete walls. The air was thick with tension, every corner they turned feeling like a potential ambush. When they reached the entrance, the scene was worse than Ryan had imagined. 2 crew members lay on the ground, motionless, while another fought desperately against a masked assailant. The Revenant stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding and terrifying. He moved with the precision of a predator, every strike calculated and devastating. Ryan didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his movements fueled by a mix of anger and adrenaline. The Revenant met him halfway, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade, the world narrowing to just the 2 of them. The Revenant was everything the rumors had described and more. His attacks were relentless, his movements fluid and unpredictable. Ryan found himself on the defensive, struggling to keep up with the sheer intensity of the fight. But he refused to back down. He had faced worse, had survived worse, and he wasn't about to let fear win. Marcus and the crew fought valiantly against the Revenant's men, the clash of steel and shouts filling the air. The Steel Hounds were outnumbered and outmatched, but they held their ground, their determination unwavering. Ryan's fight with the Revenant raged on, each strike testing the limits of his endurance. He could feel the weight of every decision he had made leading up to this moment, the lives he had taken, the ones he had saved, and the ones he had failed to protect. This fight wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption. A sudden surge of energy propelled Ryan forward, his movements sharper and more deliberate. He saw an opening and took it, his blade slicing through the Revenant's side. The masked figure staggered back, a growl of pain escaping his lips, but it wasn't enough to stop him. The Revenant recovered quickly, his strikes becoming even more ferocious. The battle reached its peak when Marcus joined Ryan, the 2 of them working in tandem to overpower the Revenant. The masked figure fought like a cornered animal, his attacks desperate but no less deadly. Finally, with a coordinated strike, Ryan and Marcus managed to disarm him, his weapon clattering to the ground. The Revenant froze, his chest heaving as he faced his adversaries. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, he reached for a hidden blade, aiming for Ryan's chest. But Marcus was faster. He tackled the Revenant to the ground, pinning him in place. "Who sent you?" Ryan demanded, his voice sharp and unyielding. The Revenant didn't answer. He lay still, his breathing ragged, his mask hiding whatever expression he might have worn. Ryan stepped closer, his knife poised just inches from the man's throat. "Talk," he growled. When the Revenant finally spoke, his voice was low and distorted. "You think this ends with me?" he said, a hint of amusement lacing his words. "You've only scratched the surface." Ryan exchanged a wary glance with Marcus. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone more controlled. The Revenant chuckled, a dark, hollow sound. "You'll find out soon enough." Before Ryan could press further, the man moved with startling speed, twisting out of Marcus's grip and delivering a sharp blow to his side. He grabbed his weapon from the ground and bolted for the exit, his movements as fluid as they were fast. "After him!" Ryan shouted, but it was too late. The revenant disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind only the echoes of his retreating footsteps. The steel hounds regrouped, their injuries stark reminders of how close they had come to losing everything. Ryan surveyed the aftermath, his chest heavy with a mix of anger and determination. They had survived the night, but he knew this was far from over. As dawn broke over the city, Ryan stood outside the battered headquarters, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The revenant's parting words echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the battles still to come. "You've only scratched the surface." The revenant's escape left a mark on the steel hounds that went deeper than the wounds of the night. It wasn't just the bloodshed or the damage to their headquarters. It was the lingering unease, the knowledge that someone so dangerous was still out there, waiting. Ryan felt the weight of it, though he refused to show it. As their leader, he couldn't afford to falter, not when his crew needed him most. In the days following the attack, Ryan threw himself into the work of rebuilding. The steel hounds worked tirelessly to repair their headquarters, the clang of hammers and the hum of drills filling the air. Every nail driven into the battered walls was a message to their enemies. They would not be broken. But Ryan knew that defenses alone wouldn't be enough. The Revenant wasn't an ordinary rival. They needed answers. Ryan began reaching out to his network of contacts, using every resource at his disposal to gather intelligence. The Revenant had left behind more questions than answers, but Ryan was determined to uncover the truth. Who was he? Why had he targeted the steel hounds? And, most importantly, what would it take to stop him? Piece by piece, a picture began to emerge. The Revenant wasn't acting alone. He was part of something far larger, a shadowy organization that operated in the city's underworld, pulling strings and manipulating events from behind the scenes. They called themselves the Covenant, and their influence stretched into every corner of the city. They controlled crews, businesses, and even law enforcement, weaving a web of power that few dared to challenge. The revelation shook Ryan. He had thought the Revenant was their greatest threat, but now he realized he was just a pawn in a much larger game. The Covenant wasn't just targeting the Steel Hounds, they were targeting anyone who dared to stand in their way. Ryan shared his findings with Marcus and the rest of the crew during a late-night meeting in the warehouse. The atmosphere was tense, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls as Ryan laid out what he had learned. "This isn't just about us anymore," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. "The Covenant has their hands in everything. If we don't stop them, no one will." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "So, what's the plan?" "We need to take away their power piece by piece," Ryan replied. "But we can't do it alone. We'll need allies." The idea of forming alliances with other crews wasn't an easy one for the Steel Hounds to accept. Trust was a rare commodity in their world, and old rivalries ran deep. But Ryan was convinced it was the only way forward. The Covenant's reach was too vast for any one crew to take on alone. Ryan and Marcus began reaching out to the leaders of other crews, carefully choosing those they believed could be trusted. The meetings were tense, each one a delicate negotiation of words and intentions. Some leaders were receptive, eager to push back against the Covenant's influence. Others were hesitant, unwilling to risk their own power for the sake of unity. One night, during a particularly heated negotiation, a rival leader named Victor voiced his doubts. "You think you can take on the Covenant? They'll crush you." Ryan met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Maybe, but if we don't try, they'll crush all of us." Victor hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he studied Ryan. Finally, he nodded. "I'm in. But if you're wrong about this, it's on you." The alliance began to take shape, a fragile coalition of crews united by a common enemy. It wasn't perfect, and tension simmered beneath the surface, but it was a start. For the first time, Ryan felt a flicker of hope. The Steel Hounds weren't alone in this fight. As the alliances solidified, Ryan turned his attention to gathering more intelligence. Through a mix of bribes, threats, and favors, his network began to yield results. The Covenant's operations were vast, but they depended on a few key players. One of them was a man named Elias, a high-ranking member who oversaw their financial dealings. If Ryan could take Elias down, it would deal a significant blow to the Covenant's power. The plan to target Elias was ambitious, and Ryan knew the risks were high. During a meeting with Marcus and a select group of trusted crew members, he laid out the details. "Elias is well protected," he said, his voice steady. "The Covenant won't take this lightly. If we fail, they'll come after us with everything they've got." Marcus grinned, his confidence unshaken. "We've faced worse." As the night of the operation approached, Ryan felt the familiar mix of excitement and dread that always came before a fight. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. The Steel Hounds weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for the city. The night of the operation arrived, cloaked in an air of tension that felt almost suffocating. The Steel Hounds gathered in the warehouse, their faces a mix of determination and unease. Ryan stood at the center, his voice steady as he outlined the plan one final time. Every detail had been meticulously prepared, but he knew that no plan survived first contact with the enemy. Elias was hosting a private gathering in an upscale club on the edge of the city, a place where the rich and powerful mingled, shielded from the chaos of the streets. The Steel Hound's objective was clear: infiltrate the event, extract Elias, and get out before the Covenant could retaliate. It was a bold plan, one that relied on precision and speed. "Remember," Ryan said, his gaze sweeping over the crew, "this isn't about showing off. It's about making a statement. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we don't leave any loose ends." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "We're ready." Ryan nodded, though the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on him. The Steel Hounds had always thrived on chaos, but this was different. This was calculated, deliberate. A new kind of fight for a new kind of crew. The group split into teams, each assigned a specific role. Marcus led the diversion team, tasked with drawing attention away from the club's main entrance. Meanwhile, Ryan and a select few would slip inside through a side entrance using forged credentials to pass as staff. It was risky, but it was the best chance they had. As they approached the club, the city lights cast long shadows on the sleek glass building. The hum of conversation and the faint strains of music drifted through the air, a stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Ryan adjusted his disguise, his heart pounding as they neared the entrance. The plan unfolded like clockwork, at first. Marcus's team executed their diversion flawlessly, creating just enough of a commotion to draw security away from the side entrance. Ryan and his team slipped inside, their movements quick and precise. The interior of the club was a world of opulence, its polished surfaces and dim lighting designed to exude exclusivity. But Ryan had no time to admire the decor. They moved through the corridors, their steps silent as they approached the private lounge where Elias was holding court. Ryan's mind raced, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. He knew the risks, they all did, but there was no turning back. As they reached the lounge, Ryan signaled for the others to hold position. Peering through the glass doors, he saw Elias seated at the center of the room, surrounded by a small group of associates. The man exuded confidence, his every gesture a display of power. Ryan's jaw tightened. This was the man who held the keys to the Covenant's operations, the man who could bring them one step closer to dismantling the shadowy organization. Ryan gave the signal, and the team moved in. The element of surprise worked in their favor, at first. The room erupted into chaos as the Steel Hounds stormed in, their movements swift and coordinated. Elias's associates scrambled to defend him, but they were no match for the Hounds' precision. Ryan reached Elias, grabbing the man by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "You're coming with us," he growled. Elias sneered, his voice laced with disdain. "You think this will change anything?" Ryan ignored him, motioning for the team to secure their target. But just as they began to move, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Ryan's stomach sank. Reinforcements. The next few moments were a blur. The Steel Hounds fought to hold their position, their movements sharp but desperate. Ryan could feel the tide turning against them. They needed to get out. Now. "Fall back!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team moved as one, retreating through the corridors with Elias in tow. The club had transformed into a battleground, the once luxurious space now a scene of chaos and destruction. Ryan's mind raced as he calculated their next move, his instincts driving him forward. They burst through the side entrance, the cool night air hitting them like a jolt of electricity. Marcus's team was waiting, their vehicles ready to go. Ryan shoved Elias into the back seat of a waiting car, climbing in after him as the tires screeched against the pavement. As the vehicles sped away, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the heavy weight of what they had just done. Ryan looked at Elias, the man's composure cracked but not broken. This was just the beginning, and they all knew it. Back at the warehouse, the Steel Hounds regrouped, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. Elias sat bound to a chair, his eyes burning with quiet fury. Ryan stood before him, his expression unreadable. "You're going to tell us everything," Ryan said, his voice low and firm. Elias smirked, though there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. "You've made a mistake," he said. "The Covenant doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget." Ryan leaned closer, his gaze unyielding. "Neither do we." Elias sat bound to the chair in the center of the warehouse, the dim light casting long shadows across his face. The Steel Hounds stood in a tense circle around him, their expressions hard as they waited for Ryan to begin. The weight of the night's operation hung heavy in the air, the adrenaline of the escape giving way to a silence almost as suffocating as the heat. Ryan stepped forward, his knife glinting in the low light. His voice was calm, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. "Let's make this simple, Elias. You tell us what we want to know, and this ends quickly." Elias smirked, his composure unshaken despite the situation. "You think you can scare me?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "The Covenant doesn't fear men like you." Ryan didn't flinch. He leaned closer, his gaze locking onto Elias's. "The Covenant isn't here," he said quietly. "I am." The room fell silent as the words hung in the air. Elias's smirk faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Ryan pressed on. "Let's start with the basics," Ryan said. "Who runs the Covenant?" Elias laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think they'd tell me that? I'm a cog in the machine, Ryan, just like you." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Then tell me what you do know." For a moment, Elias said nothing, his eyes flicking between Ryan and the crew. Finally, he sighed. "The Covenant is bigger than you think," he said. "Bigger than this city. They control everything: money, power, influence. Taking me won't change that." Marcus stepped forward, his voice sharp. "We'll see about that." Ryan raised a hand, stopping Marcus in his tracks. "Go on," he said, his focus never wavering from Elias. "They have hubs," Elias continued, his voice lower now. "Places where they keep their operations running. But you'll never get close. The security alone would—" Ryan cut him off. "Where?" Elias hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "What do you plan to do, Ryan? March in there and take them down? You'd be signing your own death warrant." Ryan's knife hovered inches from Elias's throat. "Where?" Elias exhaled sharply, a mix of frustration and resignation. "There's a hub on the east side," he said finally. "An old shipping yard. They move money, weapons, people, everything, through there, but you'll never get past their guards." Ryan straightened, his mind already racing. The shipping yard was a start, a piece of the puzzle he had been trying to solve. He glanced at Marcus, who nodded, already understanding the next step. What else? Ryan pressed. Who do they answer to? How do they communicate? Elias shook his head. That's all you're getting from me. Ryan's grip tightened on the knife, but he forced himself to step back. We'll see, he said, his voice cold. The steel hounds regrouped in the corner of the warehouse, their voices low as they discussed their next move. Marcus was the first to speak. We've got a location, he said. That's something. But it's not enough, Ryan replied. The Covenant is bigger than we thought. If we hit them head-on, we'll lose. So, what do we do? One of the crew members asked. Ryan's gaze shifted back to Elias, who sat silently in his chair, his expression unreadable. We use him, Ryan said. He's our way in. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They trusted Ryan, even if the path ahead seemed impossible. Over the next few days, the steel hounds began preparing for their next move. Ryan worked tirelessly, coordinating with Marcus and the rest of the crew to gather intelligence on the shipping yard. They learned about guard rotations, entry points, and the kinds of shipments that moved through the facility. Every detail mattered. Meanwhile, Elias remained their prisoner. Ryan spent hours questioning him, piecing together fragments of information that could give them an edge. Elias resisted at first, his loyalty to the Covenant unshaken. But as the days wore on, cracks began to appear in his facade. Ryan exploited them ruthlessly, using every tool at his disposal to break through the man's defenses. By the end of the week, they had a plan. It was risky, but it was their best chance at striking a blow against the Covenant. The steel hounds would infiltrate the shipping yard under the cover of darkness, using the chaos of a scheduled shipment to slip past the guards. Their goal was to disrupt the hub's operations and gather as much intelligence as possible. As the night of the operation approached, the tension among the crew was palpable. Ryan stood before them in the warehouse, his voice steady as he addressed the group. "This is our chance," he said. "The Covenant thinks they're untouchable. Tonight we prove them wrong." The crew nodded, their determination evident. Marcus stepped forward, clapping Ryan on the shoulder. "We've got this." Ryan forced a small smile, though the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. The Steelhounds weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for the city. The night was moonless, the sky a deep, impenetrable black that seemed to press down on the city. The steel hounds gathered at the edge of the shipping yard, their dark clothing blending into the shadows. Ryan crouched behind an abandoned stack of crates, his eyes scanning the sprawling facility. The shipping yard was alive with activity, trucks rumbling along narrow paths, workers shouting orders, and guards patrolling in pairs. It was a fortress, but Ryan's crew had faced worse. He turned to Marcus, who knelt beside him, his face grim but focused. "You ready?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded. "Let's do this." Ryan signaled to the rest of the crew, and they moved as one, slipping through the shadows with practiced ease. Their plan was simple but risky. Create a diversion to draw the guards away from the main warehouse while a smaller team led by Ryan infiltrated the hub. The goal was twofold: disrupt the Covenant's operations and gather evidence of their activities. The first team, led by Marcus, made their way to the far side of the yard, where a stack of fuel barrels sat unattended. Ryan watched as they set the charges, their movements quick and efficient. Moments later, a deafening explosion shattered the night, flames licking at the sky as the barrels erupted in a fiery blaze. The yard erupted into chaos. Guards shouted orders, their voices cutting through the din as they rushed toward the explosion. Ryan used the distraction to slip past the remaining guards, his team following close behind. They moved swiftly, their footsteps muffled against the gravel as they approached the main warehouse. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and machinery, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. Ryan led the way, his knife drawn as he navigated the narrow aisles. His heart pounded in his chest, every shadow and sound setting his nerves on edge. The plan was working so far, but he knew better than to let his guard down. As they reached the center of the warehouse, Ryan's eyes fell on a steel door marked with the Covenant's emblem. "There," he said, gesturing to the door. "That's where we need to go." One of the crew members, a wiry man named Dex, stepped forward with a set of lockpicks. He worked quickly, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. The lock clicked open, and Ryan pushed the door inward, revealing a room filled with monitors, documents, and crates of weapons. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Start grabbing everything you can. We need to move fast." The crew sprang into action, rifling through the documents and snapping photos of the monitors. Ryan focused on the crates, prying one open to reveal an arsenal of high-tech weapons. He frowned, his mind racing as he tried to understand what the Covenant was planning. These weren't the kind of weapons used for defense. They were meant for war. A sudden noise from the corridor outside snapped Ryan out of his thoughts. He signaled for silence, his knife at the ready as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. The crew froze, their breaths shallow as they waited for the intruders to pass. But the footsteps didn't pass. They stopped just outside the door. Ryan's grip tightened on his knife as the door burst open, revealing a group of heavily armed guards. The room erupted into chaos as the steel hounds fought to hold their ground. Ryan moved with precision, his blade flashing as he took down one guard after another. But the numbers were against them, and the fight quickly turned desperate. "Fall back!" Ryan shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony. The crew retreated, grabbing what evidence they could as they fought their way out of the warehouse. The corridors were a blur of shadows and gunfire, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke. Ryan's mind raced as he calculated their next move, his instincts driving him forward. They burst out into the open air, the cool night a stark contrast to the chaos inside. Marcus's team was waiting, their vehicles idling nearby. Ryan and his crew piled into the cars, the tires screeching as they sped away from the yard. As the city lights blurred past, Ryan looked down at the documents clutched in his hands. They had risked everything for this, and he could only hope it would be enough. The Covenant was far more powerful than he had imagined, and the evidence they had gathered was just the beginning. Back at the warehouse, the crew regrouped, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. Ryan spread the documents out on a table, his eyes scanning the pages as the crew crowded around him. The evidence painted a grim picture. The Covenant's operations were vast, their influence extending far beyond the city. But it also revealed weaknesses, names, locations, and supply lines that could be exploited. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the weight of what they had discovered. "We've got a shot at taking them down." Marcus nodded, his expression hard but resolute. "Then, let's make it count." The steel hounds wasted no time. The documents retrieved from the shipping yard were a gold mine of information, names, addresses, and coded messages that hinted at the Covenant's sprawling network. Ryan knew they had struck a nerve, and the clock was ticking. The Covenant wouldn't sit idly by while their operations were exposed. Ryan stood in the center of the warehouse, the documents spread out on a table before him. The crew gathered around, their faces a mix of determination and unease. Marcus leaned against a nearby wall, his arms crossed as he studied the information. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice steady. "We've got a window of opportunity, but it won't stay open for long. The Covenant is going to retaliate. We need to move first." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "So, what's the plan?" Ryan tapped a map spread across the table, his finger landing on a marked location. "Here. This is one of their major supply routes. If we can disrupt it, we'll cut off a key part of their operation." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had faced danger before, but taking on the Covenant directly was a different kind of fight. Ryan could feel the tension in the air, but he also saw the resolve in their eyes. They trusted him, even if the odds were against them. The plan was simple, but bold. The Steel Hounds would intercept a convoy carrying a shipment of weapons and supplies bound for one of the Covenant's strongholds. The convoy was heavily guarded, but Ryan was confident they could pull it off. Timing would be everything. As night fell, the crew prepared for the operation. Vehicles were loaded with weapons and gear, and final checks were made on communications and escape routes. Ryan moved through the warehouse, checking in with each team member. He could see the nervous energy in their movements, but he also saw their determination. Marcus approached him as he double-checked his gear. "You think this will work?" he asked quietly. Ryan nodded. "It has to. We've got momentum, Marcus. If we don't act now, we'll lose it." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Then let's make it count." The convoy route ran through a desolate stretch of road on the outskirts of the city, a perfect location for an ambush. The steel hounds arrived early, setting up positions along the road. Ryan took point, his eyes scanning the horizon as they waited for the convoy to appear. Minutes felt like hours as the crew lay in wait, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hum of the city. Finally, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Ryan signaled to the crew and they readied their weapons. The convoy came into view, a line of armored trucks flanked by SUVs filled with armed guards. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as he gave the signal. The first explosion rocked the convoy, sending one of the lead vehicles careening off the road. Chaos erupted as the steel hounds launched their assault, their movements swift and coordinated. Ryan led the charge, his weapon steady as he fired at the guards. The air was thick with smoke and the deafening roar of gunfire. The guards fought back fiercely, but the steel hounds had the element of surprise on their side. One by one, the convoy's defenses began to crumble. As the battle raged on, Ryan focused on the main truck, the one carrying the shipment. He fought his way through the chaos, his every move calculated and deliberate. When he reached the truck, he found it heavily guarded, but he didn't hesitate. With Marcus at his side, they took down the guards, their teamwork seamless. Ryan climbed into the truck, his eyes widening as he took in the cargo. Crates filled with weapons, explosives, and encrypted documents lined the interior. This wasn't just a shipment. It was a war chest. "We've got it," Ryan shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Move out." The crew began their retreat, loading as much of the shipment as they could into their vehicles. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, a reminder that their time was running out. Ryan and Marcus worked quickly, their movements sharp as they secured the last of the crates. As the steel hounds sped away from the scene, Ryan couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the Covenant, and the evidence they had gathered would be invaluable. Back at the warehouse, the crew celebrated their victory, their exhaustion forgotten in the wake of their success. Ryan spread the newly acquired documents out on the table, his mind already racing with plans. The shipment had been a significant win, but he knew the fight was far from over. "This is just the beginning," Ryan said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "The Covenant will come for us, but we'll be ready." Marcus nodded, a small grin playing at his lips. "They're not as untouchable as they think." As the night wore on, the crew began to settle, their excitement giving way to the weight of what lay ahead. Ryan sat alone at the table, his eyes scanning the documents. The Covenant was powerful, but they weren't invincible. And for the first time, Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. The Steel Hounds' successful raid on the convoy sent ripples through the city's underworld. The Covenant, long thought to be untouchable, had been wounded. But with victory came consequences, and Ryan knew retaliation would be swift and brutal. The days that followed were a flurry of preparation. The crew worked tirelessly to fortify their headquarters, reinforcing entrances and establishing tighter surveillance. Shifts rotated around the clock, ensuring there was never a moment when they were unprotected. Ryan immersed himself in the trove of documents and data seized from the convoy, seeking any advantage they could exploit. One name appeared repeatedly: Constantine Gray. A high-ranking operative within the Covenant, Gray was the linchpin of their logistics and supply chain. He coordinated shipments, ensured their networks ran smoothly, and kept the gears of the Covenant's operations turning. Taking him out would be a crippling blow. Ryan called a meeting in the warehouse, the crew gathering around the central table. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. "We've got a target," Ryan began, his voice steady. "Constantine Gray. He's responsible for the Covenant supply lines. If we can take him out, their operations will fall apart." Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Where is he?" Ryan pointed to a map on the table. A compound on the west side. High walls, armed guards, full surveillance. This isn't going to be easy. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had faced danger before, but this mission was a different level of risk. Ryan could sense their apprehension, but also their resolve. They trusted him to lead them. The plan required precision and coordination. The Steel Hounds would infiltrate the compound under the cover of darkness, neutralize the guards, and eliminate Gray. Every detail was scrutinized as Ryan and Marcus laid out the strategy. "This has to be clean," Ryan emphasized. "If we mess up, we're not walking out of there." Night fell, and the crew prepared for the mission. The air was thick with tension as they loaded their gear into vehicles. Ryan moved through the group, checking in with each member. He offered quiet reassurances, his calm demeanor masking the storm raging inside him. The compound loomed ahead, its high walls illuminated by floodlights. Ryan studied it through binoculars, noting guard rotations and potential entry points. "Stick to the plan," he whispered to the crew. "We move fast, stay quiet, and get out before they know what hit them." The first phase went smoothly. Silenced weapons took out the perimeter guards, their bodies carefully hidden to avoid detection. Ryan led the team toward the main building, their movements silent as shadows. Each step brought them closer to their target, but the weight of the mission bore down on them. They reached the main doors, where Dex worked his magic on the lock. The seconds dragged as he picked it, every sound amplified by the silence. Finally, the lock clicked open and the team slipped inside. The building was a maze of corridors and rooms, its sleek interior a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Ryan signaled for the crew to split into teams, each tasked with clearing a different section. As his group moved deeper, they encountered resistance. Guards emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised. The firefight was fierce, the confined space amplifying every shot. Ryan fought with precision, his movements honed by years of experience. Finally, they reached the heart of the compound, Constantine Gray's office. The door was locked, but Marcus's boot made short work of it. Inside, Gray stood behind a massive desk, his expression calm despite the chaos. "You've made a mistake," Gray said, his voice cold. "The Covenant will bury you." Ryan leveled his weapon at the man. "Not if we bury you first." Gray reached for a gun, but Marcus was faster. A single shot echoed, and Gray collapsed behind the desk. The room fell silent, the weight of their actions settling over the crew. "Grab everything," Ryan ordered. "We're not leaving empty-handed." The crew worked quickly, gathering files, hard drives, and anything that looked valuable. The sound of distant sirens reached their ears, a reminder that their time was running out. Ryan's heart pounded as he coordinated their escape. They slipped out of the building, their movements sharp and deliberate. The vehicles were waiting, engines idling as the crew piled in. The drive back to the warehouse was tense, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines. Back at headquarters, the Steel Hounds unloaded their spoils. Ryan spread the documents across the central table, his mind already racing with the possibilities. The mission had been a success, but he knew it was only the beginning. The Covenant would strike back, and they had to be ready. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, his expression a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "One step closer," he said. Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "And 1,000 more to go." The death of Constantine Gray sent shockwaves through the Covenant. For the first time, the Steel Hounds weren't just an irritation, they were a legitimate threat. Ryan knew the retaliation would be swift and brutal. Every second counted, and they had to stay ahead of their enemies. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The crew fortified the warehouse, reinforcing every entry point and setting up additional surveillance. Around-the-clock shifts ensured no blind spots, but Ryan's attention was on the documents recovered from Gray's compound. Each file was another piece of the puzzle, but many were encrypted, and progress was slow. Dex worked tirelessly to crack the codes, his frustration growing with every stymied attempt. Then they hit a breakthrough. Hidden in the dense code was a pattern of activity, a trail of encrypted messages tied to locations across the city. One name kept appearing: the architect. Ryan called a meeting in the warehouse, his voice steady as he explained what they had uncovered. "This architect is the one pulling the strings," he said, his finger tracing the map spread across the table. "If we're going to take the Covenant down, it starts with them." Marcus frowned, arms crossed as he leaned against the table. "How do we even find them? They're not just going to send us an invite." "We track the messages," Ryan replied. "They're tied to specific locations. If we can follow the trail, we might get a lead." The first location on the trail was a luxury hotel in the heart of the city. It was the kind of place where power brokers gathered, shielded by wealth and privilege. Ryan assembled a small team for the operation, knowing the risks of infiltrating such a high-profile location. They moved carefully, their forged credentials and disguises allowing them to slip through the lobby unnoticed. The conference room they targeted had glass walls, offering a glimpse of the figures inside. Ryan's heart pounded as he recognized one of the men from the files, a mid-level operative who handled communications for the Covenant. This was their chance to intercept valuable intel. Marcus set up a listening device on the door, his movements precise despite the tension. The conversation inside was low, but the device picked up fragments that stood out: shipment, secure location, and a name: Belmont. Ryan's mind raced. Belmont wasn't just a name. It was a warehouse district on the edge of the city, known for its isolation and sparse traffic. It was the perfect place for the Covenant to conduct their operations in secrecy. The Steel Hounds regrouped at their headquarters, the crew tense as Ryan laid out the next steps. "Belmont," he said, pointing to the map. "This is where we hit next." The docks at Belmont were a sprawling maze of shipping containers and warehouses, their shadows long under the dim glow of overhead lamps. Ryan and the crew moved silently, their footsteps muffled against the cracked pavement. The air smelled of salt and oil, a reminder of the water just beyond the docks. They reached the designated warehouse, its unassuming exterior belying the activity inside. Ryan signaled for the crew to spread out, their movements synchronized as they neutralized the guards one by one. Inside, the warehouse was a treasure trove: state-of-the-art equipment, rows of weapons, and crates marked with the Covenant's emblem. Ryan's eyes landed on a terminal in the corner. "Dex, see what you can pull from that system," he ordered. Dex nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he hacked into the system. Files began to download, their progress agonizingly slow. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew secured the perimeter, their eyes sharp for any sign of reinforcements. The tension shattered when an alarm blared through the warehouse. Ryan's stomach sank as the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the room. "Grab what you can," he shouted. "We're out of time." The crew sprang into action, gathering files, weapons, and anything else of value. The sound of vehicles approaching grew louder, the guards closing in. Ryan and Marcus coordinated the retreat, their movements sharp as they led the crew toward the exits. The Steel Hounds fought their way out, the chaos of the warehouse spilling onto the docks. By the time they reached their vehicles, the Covenant's reinforcements had arrived. Tires screeched as the crew sped away, the roar of engines fading into the night. Back at the warehouse, the crew regrouped, their breaths heavy as they unloaded their spoils. Ryan spread the newly retrieved files across the table, his mind racing as he scanned the pages. Among the data was something that made his blood run cold: a detailed plan for a large-scale operation in the city, set to take place in just a few days. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Covenant's next move. If we can stop this, we can turn the tide." Marcus nodded, his expression hard but resolute. "Then let's get to work." The Steel Hounds had no time to waste. The documents from Belmont revealed a chilling plan: a large-scale operation that could plunge the city into chaos. Ryan knew this wasn't just about striking back at the Covenant anymore. It was about saving lives and stopping a catastrophe. The crew worked tirelessly to decipher the details of the plan. Maps, schedules, and coded messages were spread across the warehouse table, each piece bringing them closer to the truth. The operation, ominously dubbed Inferno, involved simultaneous attacks on critical city infrastructure, power plants, transportation hubs, and communication networks. The goal was clear: destabilize the city and create a power vacuum that the Covenant could exploit. Ryan's stomach churned as he studied the plan. This wasn't just a bid for control. It was an act of war. "We've got 3 days," Ryan said, his voice tense as he addressed the crew. 3 days to figure out how to stop this. Marcus leaned forward, arms crossed. "Do we even have the manpower for this? We're talking about multiple locations, heavily guarded. We'll be stretched thin." Ryan nodded. "We don't need to stop every attack. If we can take out their command center, the rest of the operation will fall apart." Dex tapped on his laptop, pulling up an image of a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. "This is it," he said. "According to the files, this is their hub for coordinating Inferno. It's heavily fortified, but if we can get inside, we can shut them down." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The stakes had never been higher, and the risks were staggering. But there was no hesitation in their resolve. They had come too far to back down now. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. The Steel Hounds scouted the command center, observing guard rotations, mapping entry points, and identifying escape routes. Every detail was scrutinized, every contingency planned for. Ryan worked tirelessly, his focus unrelenting as the weight of the mission pressed on him. The night of the operation arrived. The warehouse was tense as the crew checked their gear and reviewed the plan one final time. Ryan addressed them, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "This is it," he said, his gaze steady. "We fought hard to get here, and I know the risks we're taking. But if we don't stop this, the city pays the price. Let's end this." The command center loomed in the distance, its stark exterior illuminated by floodlights. The Steel Hounds moved silently through the shadows, their footsteps muffled against the gravel. Ryan led the way, his heart pounding as they approached the perimeter. The first phase of the plan went smoothly. Silenced weapons took out the perimeter guards, their bodies carefully hidden. The crew moved swiftly, their synchronization a testament to their preparation. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the Covenant's operation. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. The hum of servers and the flicker of monitors filled the air as operatives moved about, unaware of the threat closing in. Ryan signaled for the crew to split into teams, each with a specific objective: disable the communications hub, secure the control room, and gather intelligence. Ryan's team headed for the control room, their movements precise as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Guards they encountered were dispatched quickly and quietly, their bodies dragged into the shadows. When they reached the control room, the sight was both intimidating and galvanizing. Rows of monitors displayed live feeds of the city, each one tied to a target in the Inferno plan. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice firm. "Shut it all down." Dex got to work on the main terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he bypassed security protocols. Ryan kept watch, his weapon raised as distant gunfire echoed through the building. The other teams were engaged, but there was no time to be distracted. The tension reached a breaking point when an alarm blared through the facility. Ryan's heart sank as he realized they had been discovered. "Hold them off," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Guards flooded the corridor outside, their weapons raised as they engaged the Steel Hounds. Ryan fought with precision, his movements sharp as he defended the control room. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the acrid smell of smoke, but he refused to back down. "Almost there," Dex shouted, his voice strained as he worked on the terminal. "Make it fast," Ryan snapped, his eyes darting between the monitors and the door. Finally, the system shut down. The monitors flickered to black and Dex wiped the servers clean. "We're clear," he shouted. Ryan didn't waste a second. "Fall back," he ordered. The crew retreated with precision, their movements sharp despite the chaos. They fought their way out of the building. The sounds of battle and them. By the time they reached their vehicles, the command center was in shambles, its operations crippled. The drive back to the warehouse was tense, the weight of what they had done settling over them. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Covenant had been dealt a blow, but they were far from defeated. Back at headquarters, the crew regrouped, their exhaustion palpable but their determination unwavering. Ryan spread the newly retrieved intel across the table, his mind racing with possibilities. The Inferno plan had been stopped, but the fight was far from over. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, his voice steady. "One hell of a fight," he said. Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "And it's not over yet." The fallout from the destruction of the Covenant's command center was immediate. News of the disrupted Inferno operation spread through the underworld like wildfire. The Steel Hounds' audacious strike had dealt a crippling blow to the Covenant, but it had also painted a target on their backs. Ryan knew their enemies wouldn't rest until they were destroyed. In the aftermath, the Steel Hounds reinforced their headquarters, transforming it into a veritable fortress. Entry points were bolstered, surveillance systems were upgraded, and the crew worked in rotating shifts to ensure constant vigilance. Ryan spent hours poring over the intel retrieved from the command center. Hidden in the trove of files was a promising lead, a meeting of the Covenant's high-ranking operatives to discuss their next move. Ryan called a meeting in the warehouse, the crew gathering around the central table. "We've hit them hard," he began, his voice steady. "But they're regrouping. There's a meeting tomorrow night, a gathering of their inner circle. If we can intercept it, we can take them out before they strike back." Marcus frowned, arms crossed. "Where's the meeting?" Ryan tapped a map on the table, his finger landing on a location in the city's financial district. "Here, an abandoned skyscraper under renovation. It's isolated, perfect for a covert meeting." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The stakes were higher than ever, but their determination outweighed their fears. Ryan could see it in their eyes. They were ready to fight. The plan was ambitious. Infiltrate the skyscraper, confirm the presence of the Covenant's operatives, and eliminate them. Timing and precision were critical. Ryan spent the rest of the day reviewing the plan, ensuring every contingency was accounted for. The night of the operation arrived. The crew loaded their gear into vehicles, the air thick with tension as they prepared to leave. Ryan moved through the group, offering quiet words of encouragement. "We've got this," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Stick to the plan, and we'll make it out." The skyscraper loomed in the distance, its skeletal frame illuminated by the faint glow of the city lights. The Steel Hounds moved silently through the shadows, their footsteps muffled against the pavement. Ryan led the way, his heart pounding as they approached the building. The first phase of the plan went smoothly. The crew used grappling hooks to scale the exterior, their movements swift and precise. They reached the designated floor, their eyes scanning the dimly lit interior. The space was empty, save for a few scattered tools and construction materials. Ryan signaled for the crew to spread out, their weapons at the ready as they searched the area. The tension was palpable, every sound amplified by the silence. They found no sign of the Covenant's operatives, only an empty space and the faint hum of the city below. Marcus approached Ryan, his expression grim. "Something's not right," he said quietly. Ryan nodded. He felt it too, a sense of unease, as if they were being watched. He was about to respond when the lights in the building flickered, then went out completely. "Get down!" Ryan shouted, his voice cutting through the darkness. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Ryan hit the ground, his weapon drawn as he scanned the shadows for their attackers. The Covenant had anticipated their move, and now they were trapped. The Steel Hounds fought back with everything they had, their movements sharp despite the chaos. Ryan's mind raced as he tried to assess the situation, his instincts driving him forward. They needed to regroup, to find a way out before it was too late. "Fall back!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony. The crew moved as one, their retreat calculated as they fought their way toward the exit. The building was a maze of shadows and gunfire, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of spent ammunition. Ryan could feel the weight of every step, the knowledge that one misstep could be fatal. They reached the stairwell, their breaths heavy as they descended the narrow steps. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them, a reminder that their enemies were close. Ryan led the way, his weapon ready as they navigated the twisting corridors. When they finally burst into the open air, the cool night was a stark contrast to the chaos inside. Vehicles were waiting, engines idling as the crew piled in. Tires screeched against the pavement as they sped away, the skyscraper fading into the distance. Back at the warehouse, the crew regrouped, their exhaustion palpable. Ryan's mind raced as he reviewed the night's events. The mission had been a trap, but they had survived. And amid the chaos, they had managed to retrieve something valuable, an encrypted device left behind by one of the Covenant's operatives. "This isn't over," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the weight of the night. "But we've got something, and we're going to use it." Marcus nodded, his expression hard but resolute. "Let's make it count." The encrypted device retrieved from the skyscraper was a lifeline, a chance to finally understand the Covenant's inner workings. Dex worked tirelessly to crack the encryption, his frustration mounting with every failed attempt. The warehouse buzzed with nervous energy as the crew prepared for whatever the data might reveal. Ryan knew they couldn't afford to wait much longer. Time was not on their side. Finally, late one night, Dex let out a triumphant shout. "I'm in!" he exclaimed, his fingers still flying over the keyboard. The crew gathered around the laptop, tension giving way to focus. The device contained a trove of information, financial transactions, communications, and, most importantly, a list of operatives. Among the names was one that stopped everyone cold: the architect. Next to the name was a location, a heavily fortified estate on the outskirts of the city. Ryan's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with resolve. "This is it. The architect is the mastermind behind everything. We take them out, and we cripple the Covenant." Marcus crossed his arms, his expression grim. "It's not going to be easy. If they're as important as we think, they'll be ready for us." Ryan met Marcus's gaze. "We don't have a choice. This is our best shot." Preparations began immediately. The estate was a fortress surrounded by high walls and bristling with security. Ryan and Marcus spent hours reviewing blueprints, planning their approach with meticulous precision. Every contingency was considered, every escape route mapped. There would be no room for error. The night of the operation arrived, the crew moving with the practiced silence of predators. The air was thick with tension as they approached the estate, their dark clothing blending into the shadows. Ryan signaled for the team to halt, scanning the perimeter for guards. He counted 2 patrols, their movements routine but disciplined. The first phase went smoothly. Silenced weapons took out the perimeter guards, their bodies hidden among the landscaping. Grappling hooks carried the crew over the walls, and they landed soundlessly on the other side. The estate's interior was a maze of opulent rooms and corridors, every detail screaming wealth and power. But there was no time to admire the surroundings. Ryan led the way, his weapon drawn as they navigated the labyrinth. According to the blueprints, the architect's private office was on the 2nd floor. The crew moved with precision, avoiding cameras and bypassing locked doors with Dex's nimble expertise. Each step brought them closer to their target. The tension grew as they reached the office, its heavy oak door a stark barrier. Ryan signaled for the crew to take positions, his heart pounding in his chest. With a nod, Marcus kicked the door open, the sound reverberating through the corridor. Inside, the architect sat behind an imposing desk, their expression calm despite the intrusion. "I've been expecting you," they said, their voice low and smooth. Ryan leveled his weapon at the figure. "It's over," he said, his voice cold. "Your operation ends tonight." The architect smiled faintly, their hands folded on the desk. "Do you really think killing me will stop the Covenant? We are everywhere. Cut off one head, and another takes its place." Ryan's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." Before anyone could react, guards burst into the room, weapons blazing. The Steel Hounds responded instantly, their movements honed by years of experience. Ryan focused on the architect, his every move calculated as he fought to close the distance. The battle was fierce, the confined space amplifying every sound. Ryan's heart pounded as he ducked behind the desk, his eyes locked on the architect. In the chaos, he saw his chance. He lunged forward, pinning the architect to the chair. "You've already lost," they said, their tone defiant even with Ryan's weapon pressed against their chest. Ryan pulled the trigger. The architect slumped forward, their final words hanging in the air. The room fell silent. The battle over, but the aftermath just beginning. The Steel Hounds wasted no time. They rifled through the office, gathering documents, laptops, and anything else of value. By the time they retreated, the estate was in flames, a smoldering ruin left as a warning to the Covenant. Back at the warehouse, the crew regrouped, their exhaustion evident but their determination unbroken. Ryan spread the recovered intel across the table, his mind already racing with possibilities. The architect was gone, but the network they had built was vast, and dismantling it would take more than a single victory. "This is a start," Ryan said, his voice steady, "but we've got a long way to go." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, a faint grin breaking through his fatigue. "We'll see it through." Ryan nodded, the weight of the mission pressing on him. The Covenant wasn't finished, but neither were they. The fight was far from over. The victory over the architect felt hollow as Ryan sifted through the mountain of intel retrieved from the estate. The files painted a grim picture. The Covenant's operations extended far beyond the city. Their influence was global, with roots in government, corporations, and criminal syndicates. While the architect had been a crucial player, their removal only exposed the breadth of the organization. Ryan stood at the center of the warehouse, the crew gathered around. The table was cluttered with maps, decrypted files, and photographs. "This is bigger than we imagined," he said, his voice steady. "The Covenant isn't just a network, it's an empire, and now they know we're coming." Marcus leaned against a support beam, arms crossed. "So what's the plan? We keep hitting them until they fall apart?" Ryan nodded. "Exactly. We dismantle their network, piece by piece. If we can destroy their supply lines and disrupt their operations, we can force them to the surface." Dex raised his hand, his tone urgent. "There's something big coming up. A shipment at the docks tomorrow night, high-value cargo. Weapons, cash, and something else. The files call it Package Alpha, but the details are encrypted." Ryan's brow furrowed. The docks were familiar territory, but this shipment sounded like more than routine supplies. "We intercept it," he said firmly. "Whatever's in that package, it's important enough for them to protect it. If we can take it, we gain leverage." The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Ryan and Marcus pored over blueprints of the docks, identifying entry points, chokeholds, and escape routes. The crew checked and rechecked their weapons, their movements sharp despite the tension. Every detail had to be perfect. As night fell, the Steel Hounds moved out. The city's hum faded as they approached the docks, replaced by the rhythmic crash of waves against the pier. Floodlights illuminated the shipping yard, casting long shadows over the rows of containers. Ryan led the way, his senses heightened as they slipped through the perimeter. The first phase of the operation went smoothly. The crew neutralized the guards stationed at the gates, their actions swift and silent. They split into teams, each assigned a critical task: disabling surveillance, securing the shipment, and providing cover. Ryan's team approached the central warehouse where the shipment was being prepared for transport. Through a narrow window, he spotted workers loading crates onto trucks while guards patrolled the area. He signaled for his team to hold position, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. "This isn't just a shipment," Marcus muttered, peering through binoculars. "It's an operation." Ryan nodded. "We stick to the plan. Dex, get to that terminal. We need to know what we're dealing with." Dex moved quickly, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he hacked into the system. A list of items appeared on the screen: guns, explosives, and crates labeled with numbers. But one entry stood out: Package Alpha. Its details were encrypted, but its destination was clear: a private airstrip outside the city. "We need that crate," Ryan said, his voice firm. "Let's move." The steel hounds advanced, their presence quickly noticed. The warehouse erupted into chaos as gunfire rang out, the sharp cracks echoing through the cavernous space. Ryan led the charge, his weapon steady as he fired at the guards. The crew pushed forward, their movements relentless despite the resistance. Ryan spotted the crate marked Alpha, its size imposing among the other shipments. "Cover me," he shouted, darting toward it. Marcus and the others provided suppressing fire as Ryan and Dex secured the crate. A forklift sat nearby, its engine humming. Ryan climbed into the driver's seat, the controls unfamiliar but intuitive. The machine groaned under the weight of the crate as Ryan maneuvered it toward the exit. "Move! Move! Move!" Marcus yelled, his voice urgent as reinforcements poured into the warehouse. The steel hounds retreated under heavy fire, their movements sharp despite the chaos. The sound of sirens in the distance spurred them on, a reminder that time was running out. Ryan's heart pounded as he navigated the forklift through the maze of containers, the crate in tow. They reached the trucks waiting at the edge of the docks, the vehicles roaring to life as the crew loaded the crate. Ryan climbed into the passenger seat of the lead truck, his chest heaving as the convoy sped away from the scene. Back at the warehouse, the atmosphere was electric. The steel hounds had risked everything, but they had succeeded. The crate sat in the center of the room, its ominous presence commanding attention. Ryan and Dex worked quickly to crack the lock, their movements urgent. When the lid finally lifted, the contents stunned the crew. Inside were advanced surveillance equipment, encrypted drives, and a dossier marked Critical Targets. Ryan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, his breath catching. The Covenant wasn't just consolidating power, they were planning targeted eliminations. "This changes everything," Ryan said, his voice low but resolute. "We've got the upper hand now, but we have to move fast." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, his expression hard. "Then, let's finish this." The contents of Package Alpha had revealed the magnitude of the Covenant's next move. The dossier outlined coordinated assassinations, infrastructure sabotage, and the complete destabilization of the city's power structure. Every target was critical to maintaining balance: officials, corporate leaders, and law enforcement heads who had resisted the Covenant's grasp. Ryan stood over the map-laden table in the warehouse, his crew surrounding him. The weight of what lay ahead was palpable. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "They're moving to erase any resistance. If we don't stop them now, they'll own this city." Marcus shook his head, frustration evident in his clenched fists. "They've got too many targets. We can't protect them all." Ryan nodded. "We don't have to. The real power lies with their leadership. According to this dossier, they're gathering tomorrow night at an estate just outside the city. They're using it as a command center to coordinate these attacks. If we hit them there, we cut the head off the snake." The estate was an imposing fortress, heavily guarded and isolated. The mission would be their most dangerous yet. But the stakes left no room for hesitation. The steel hounds spent the rest of the day preparing, their focus unwavering as they readied their weapons, studied the estate's blueprints, and mapped out every detail of their approach. As night fell, the crew set out, their vehicles cutting through the darkness. The atmosphere in the convoy was tense, the usual pre-mission banter replaced by silence. Each member of the crew knew what failure would mean, not just for them, but for the city. The estate loomed ahead, its high walls illuminated by floodlights. The steel hounds parked a safe distance away, moving on foot to avoid detection. Ryan scanned the perimeter, noting the guards stationed at intervals along the walls. He signaled for the team to halt. Dex whispered into his comms. "Security grid's tight, but I can override it once we're in range. Just give me the word." Ryan nodded, his mind racing as he reviewed their plan. They would disable the security system, eliminate the guards, and infiltrate the estate. The primary objective was simple: neutralize the leadership and gather intel. The first phase went smoothly. The crew neutralized the perimeter guards with silenced weapons, their bodies dragged into the shadows. Dex disabled the security grid, the estate's floodlights flickering out as the crew scaled the walls. Inside, the estate was a maze of opulent rooms and corridors, its lavish interior a stark contrast to the violence that was about to unfold. Ryan led the way, his weapon drawn as they navigated the estate. According to their intel, the leadership was gathered in the main hall, a grand room at the heart of the estate. The steel hounds moved with precision, avoiding detection as they closed in on their target. They reached the double doors leading to the hall, their breaths shallow as they prepared for the breach. Ryan signaled for the team to take positions, his heart pounding in his chest. With a nod, Marcus pushed the doors open and all hell broke loose. Inside, the Covenant's leaders were seated around a massive table, their discussion cut short by the intrusion. Guards moved to defend them, their weapons drawn. The steel hounds sprang into action, their movements sharp and coordinated. The hall became a war zone, the sound of gunfire echoing off the high ceilings. Ryan's focus was unyielding as he fought his way toward the table. The leaders scrambled to escape, but Ryan was determined not to let them slip away. He spotted the figure at the head of the table, a man who exuded authority even in the chaos. Ryan didn't need confirmation. This was the new head of the Covenant. He pushed forward, his every move deliberate as he closed the distance. The man saw him coming, his composure cracking as panic set in. He reached for a weapon, but Ryan was faster. A single shot rang out, and the man collapsed to the floor. The remaining leaders were either neutralized or subdued, their reign brought to an abrupt end. The crew worked quickly, gathering documents, hard drives, and anything that could provide insight into the remnants of the Covenant's network. By the time they retreated, the estate was in flames, a smoldering ruin left as a testament to the Covenant's downfall. Back at the warehouse, the atmosphere was electric. The mission had been a success, but the crew knew the fight wasn't over. The Covenant's network was vast, and while their leadership had been dismantled, the roots of their power still ran deep. Ryan addressed the crew, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched on his face. "This was a turning point," he said. "We've taken out their leaders, but the Covenant is still out there. We can't let up. We finish what we started." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, a faint smile breaking through his fatigue. "To the end," he said. Ryan glanced at the dossier, its pages now annotated with notes and plans. The Covenant's reign was crumbling, but the steel hounds wouldn't stop until it was reduced to ash. The Covenant's infrastructure was in shambles, but the steel hounds knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The remnants of the organization were fractured but not defeated. Intelligence recovered from the estate pointed to one final location, a heavily fortified bunker beneath an abandoned factory on the city's outskirts. This was the Covenant's fallback, their last bastion where their remaining operatives were gathering. Ryan stood at the warehouse table, the crew assembled around him. Maps, blueprints, and decrypted files cluttered the surface. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice steady but weighted. "We've taken out their leadership and crippled their operations, but if we don't hit this bunker, they'll rebuild." Marcus crossed his arms, his expression grim. "And if we fail?" Ryan met his gaze. "We don't fail." The room fell silent, the weight of Ryan's words hanging in the air. Each member of the Steel Hounds knew what this mission meant. There would be no second chances. The day was spent in fevered preparation. The bunker's location beneath a derelict factory offered natural camouflage and strategic defense, making it a formidable target. Ryan and Marcus planned their approach meticulously, studying every inch of the blueprints. The rest of the crew prepped their gear, their determination steeling against the looming threat. As night fell, the steel hounds departed in a convoy, their vehicles cutting through the industrial sprawl. The factory loomed ahead, its crumbling exterior hiding the reinforced stronghold below. Ryan parked the lead truck and signaled for the crew to move on foot. They approached the factory in silence, their movements fluid and practiced. The first phase went off without a hitch. Silenced weapons eliminated the guards stationed at the perimeter, their bodies hidden in the shadows. Dex hacked into the security grid, disabling cameras and unlocking the factory's massive steel doors. The crew slipped inside, their steps muffled against the cracked concrete floor. The descent into the bunker was steep and tense. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, their dim glow revealing the stark utilitarian design. Ryan led the way, his weapon drawn, as the crew moved deeper into the Covenant's final stronghold. The bunker's interior was a maze of corridors, rooms lined with advanced equipment, and caches of weapons. Resistance was immediate. The Covenant's operatives fought with desperation, their movements sharp but erratic. The firefights were brutal, each engagement a reminder of how high the stakes were. Ryan's team pushed toward the command center, the heart of the bunker where the Covenant's final plans were being coordinated. When they breached the room, the scale of the operation was laid bare. Monitors displayed live feeds of the city, maps covered in markers detailing contingency plans, and operatives scrambling to mount a defense. "This ends here," Ryan said, his voice cold as he took aim. The steel hounds fought fiercely, their movements precise and coordinated. Ryan targeted the operatives at the helm of the operation, his every shot deliberate. The command center descended into chaos, the room filled with the roar of gunfire and the crackle of shattered monitors. Dex worked frantically at the terminal, downloading files while simultaneously wiping the system. "I've got everything," he called out, "but we've got a problem." An alarm blared, the sound deafening. Ryan's stomach dropped as Dex read the message flashing on the screen. "Self-destruct sequence activated." "How long?" Ryan demanded. 4 minutes, maybe less," Dex replied, his voice tight with urgency. Ryan's mind raced. "Grab everything and move, now!" The steel hounds retreated, their escape sharp and disciplined despite the chaos. The bunker trembled with the force of internal explosions, debris raining down as the countdown ticked away. Every second felt like an eternity as they navigated the maze-like corridors, the weight of the mission pressing on them. They burst out into the night, the cool air a stark contrast to the suffocating tension below. Engines roared to life as the crew sped away, the factory behind them collapsing in a thunderous explosion. The bunker was gone, and with it, the Covenant's last refuge. Back at the warehouse, the crew regrouped. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but the air was electric with triumph. They had done it. The Covenant was finished. Ryan stood at the center of the room, his crew surrounding him. The maps and blueprints that had guided them through countless missions were gone, replaced by a quiet sense of victory. "We did it," Ryan said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "It's over." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, a rare smile breaking through his usual stoicism. "To the end." The crew erupted in cheers, their laughter and relief filling the space. For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to celebrate. Later, Ryan stepped outside, the night air cool against his skin. He gazed at the city lights, their glow a reminder of what they had fought to protect. The battle was over, but the scars it had left would remain. "We did it," he murmured to himself. "We finally did it."